You know, Kendall, that actually sends me down another trail talking about the LGBTQ community and its association with movies. And a movie that I think gets a lot of praise nowadays, but I think it's not a good movie in its respective series, is the Nightmare on Elm Street the Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I feel like that it's not a good Freddy movie because it subverts all the Freddy stereotypes, and it doesn't make sense logically how he can come. That's just me thinking of it from a hey, how does this work nuts and bolts wise? But it has really become like an LGBT, the lead character has really become like a character who, was a closeted gay, and he even came out personally in his own life later. And I think that was it's sort of been a movie that people have looked at and been like, hey, this is a strong movie for, for our community and stuff. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that, what you thought about that movie.
No, I agree with you on both fronts. When I first saw Nightmare on Elm Street 2, when it came out, I sort of thought, this doesn't seem like the first one. Like this is not what I remembered.
Yeah.
But I also totally, and this is part of why I think these conversations are important, is, these films or television shows are complex. And so what I see in it coming like you did from I'm a fan of slashers. I liked Wes Craven. I like Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm wanting to see more of that. And I get this kind of much more internal identity. Who am I? What am I, attracted to narrative going on. I also get that other people looked at that and said, oh yeah, that's what makes sense to me. So that's what I think is so great about this, and why, as a side note, an op-ed moment, if you will, I love when people on social media argue and debate about films. I hate when they take these ridiculous positions, like if you like that film, you're an idiot, or if you hate that film, you're an idiot. Like there are lots of great horror films that I don't care for personally, just because for whatever reason it didn't sit with me. Same thing. There are films I absolutely love. I'll go to the battle ready to fight for that. I totally get. Most people are going to say that's garbage, but that's cool. That's why we're different. That's why this is interesting.
Hey, I want to throw you under the bus, or not under the bus, but I want to put you
under the microscope.
Under the microscope, where you have to make a decision. Will you give everybody out there a couple of the films, or maybe one or two of the films that you, I guess, people that you criticize or you don't think as highly of, and some that maybe other people criticize that you think higher of than other people. Did that make sense? Maybe
it did. I could easily give you the ones that I don't like, and this, I get a lot of grief, so I apologize. I don't like a single Rob Zombie film. I didn't like House of a Thousand Corpses. I didn't like Devil's Rejects. I didn't like 31. I didn't like the Halloween reboot. I didn't like Lords of Salem. Now, I have a very good friend, Bernadette Calafell, a great professor at Gonzaga. She and I co-edited a book series on horror, and we are very good friends. She loves Rob Zombie deeply and passionately and thinks he's the greatest film auteur in the world. It just didn't. Everyone said I've watched Devil's Reject twice, and I didn't like it either time. So that's, if you want me to get hate mail, tweet, I'm at Dark Projections on Twitter. Let me have it. But yeah, it just doesn't work for me.
I like it.
Yeah, I saw the Halloween reboot that he did. And other than just the graphic violence, I did kind of like the story. But the graphic violence was just too much for me. And the fact that it started at the root with the kids and seeing them be so violent, that was just really disturbing. Yeah. But I mean, that was probably his point. And it's not like that, not that type of violence per se, but that aggression out of youth does happen. And that's certainly, disturbing in of itself. And I don't want to steal that part of that question. Bradley, let's get one more, and then I'm going to get into Kolchak.
Oh, yeah. No, just going back to that, I also think in Halloween 2, whenever he's mostly unmasked, like that mask is so tattered, it sort of takes away from the whole what Michael was. And I don't know. That was just my thing. And I guess going back to another question, talking about horror, is there any movies? So like, we talked about, like, I guess slashers, the whole, Halloween starting it. Is there, what other genres or any other genres in particular that pique your interest? I mean, I know there's a lot of genres out there, and slasher covers so much, but besides slasher, what are some other movie stereotypes or any other types of movies that you enjoy or have enjoyed criticizing either?
Yeah, I mean, across horror, I like everything. I'm not dedicated to any particular. I like zombies. I like possession. I like ghosts. Outside of horror, I've done a little bit of work on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I think this is also not that popular among some of my academic friends, but I think Marvel is the most impressive, substantial moment in cinematic history, maybe ever, but certainly in the last, 50, 60 years. Like the ability to create that cinematic universe, to dominate popular culture, I think it is very, very impressive. And so, I'm not that I would go to the battle line for every single Marvel film, because there have been some definite ones I liked and ones I didn't like as much, but you can't take away from $27 billion in box office, whatever, 29 films now over 14 years. Like that is stunning. No one's come close. And so to me, that in and of itself is just, that's an impressive piece of work. Whatever you think of it, it's impressive.
Yeah, and
Cool,
I think
cool.
I think even the box office fatigue of like the Marvel films is still. I mean, they're waning a bit, but I mean, still one of the top films this year was the new Doctor Strange. I mean,
And people said, "Oh, it's too woke," and audiences didn't like it. But Doctor Strange has made over $950 million, a number we should treat respectfully,
oh yeah,
without China, And that's the other thing. People who aren't like looking at the industry and just look at the numbers and go, "It didn't have as big a global box office." Like, yeah, but there's an entire massive continent, the number 2 film watching market in the world, has decided they're excluding the House of Mouse. So if Doctor Strange Multiverse didn't make as much as other films, you got to take into account some of that it made $950 million. I would like $950 million.
oh yeah, and I'm going
It's
to
like
loop that
$1
back
million.
around. Yeah, I'm going to loop that back around to you, Robert, because the actual director of that was, of course, Sam Raimi, who did Evil Dead, who was first reported on by our friend Mark DeWoziak, who, probably one of the greatest Kolchak.
The greatest, without a doubt.
Oh yeah,
Mark
yeah.
is the greatest. I will be the first person to say that. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, and of course, Sam did, the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. He had all the Xena Warrior Princess TV show things, and of course, that's where Bruce Campbell came out of, or at least went into after Evil Dead. So really cool stuff. Well, I am going to jump on the superhero bandwagon too, ask a question about that, and then have to lead us back into Kolchak. So I have this unresearched, unverified theory that I've always thought of and occasionally spoken about. And it's really just, and it's probably already out there because it's not that original, I don't think. But it's just that it seems like there is always a resurgence. And now it's lasted for, gosh, a good 20 years. But it seems like there is a resurgence of a supernatural / superhero movie craze, let's say, that occurs during global war, or at least during national war. And if you think about, World War II, and then the things that came out of that, and how we match that with Captain America, and the way they brought in, what's the evil group in Hydra, yeah, and how they have the link to that sort of World War II German Axis group. And then, of course, it just felt like when all these latest superhero movies came back out again, it was sort of the tail end of us in the Gulf War and Afghanistan, and then more and more things that continued. And the bizarre thing is circling back in now to where during the Cold War, now we have Russia once again being the really the bad guy, and as expressed in Stranger Things and seen in all kinds of other stuff. Have you ever seen anything, Kendall, or thought about it yourself, that there's some sort of link to these types of movies? And then also what maybe, I know you talk about the rhetoric of what's happening in society, and we talk about kind of the cultural revolutions, but at the same time, what about this influence of war and maybe how we deal with that as a public? And by the way, kudos for using leitmotif in one of your sentences in your book.
Thank you very much.
I really like that. Go ahead.
I'll try and throw in some big words every once in a while. No, I think you're exactly, certainly on the horror side, it's absolutely almost a truism in kind of horror studies that horror tracks onto at least moments of global turmoil. So, I always make the point, there are literally thousands of films that use something like horror in the silent era. There are haunted houses, and there's a version of Dracula most people know, a kind of illegitimate, illegal version called Nosferatu. Mm-hmm. There was a version of Frankenstein from 1910. So you got all these things are going on, but they never really kind of coalesce until 1931. So what's going on in 1931? The worst year of the Great Depression. Like you're talking about the highest number of bank failures, highest unemployment, and the federal government sort of saying, nothing we can do about it. Sorry. And so people really did feel like the world had turned upside down. And at that moment, interestingly, two things kind of emerge in popularity: horror and Shirley Temple. I cannot explain Shirley Temple, but I do understand that, horror becomes a way for people to process that. And then throughout the history, when you track it, 1950s, Cold War, 1968, as I talked about, the kind of second golden age of horror, that was a horrible year. I don't know if it can still be the most horrible year, because I think we've got some recent competition, but Martin Luther King is assassinated. Bobby Kennedy's assassinated. The Tet Offensive turns the war. So now it's pretty clear to everybody we're not winning, whatever that would mean, Vietnam. You got violence at the Chicago National Convention. You've got the riots in major cities after King's assassination. The country feels like it is absolutely tearing itself apart. And then along comes George Romero and puts that on the screen and says, this is what it looks like when you can't get along and you tear yourself apart. This is what it is. And so I think, it's interesting, Night of the Living Dead, the French audiences saw it first. Like Night of the Living Dead circulates around the US, kind of in midnight movies, goes to France, and the French say, yeah, that's exactly what America is. And then the film comes back and people start saying, oh yeah, this is not just a cheap independent film. This is something more. And I think the same is true and I think the other part of it is probably in all those moments, we want to see the monster, but we also want to see the heroes. And Marvel is certainly, Iron Man from 2008 is a deeply post 9/11 film. I mean, it begins in the Middle East. He's selling weapons. It's all about terror. It's all about consequences of violence and arms and et cetera, et cetera. And what's impressive to me about Marvel is they managed to not ride the bubble. Like, we certainly saw with the Superman movies in the 70s, the Batman movies in the 80s, most have a little bubble and then they lose relevance. Somehow Marvel, through all kinds of weird, wonderful ways, has managed to kind of stay at this level that is stunning. I mean, there's not a Marvel movie that's not going to open number one. They just will. We just know that. So.
Yeah, they had some prescient Doctor Strange-esque, way of organizing the way they rolled out these movies. And, with nerds like us who like harp onto one tiny little word or one tiny little scene in a movie, whether it's, Tony Stark all of a sudden having Captain America's shield, we're like, what? Blowing your mind, if you hadn't read all the spoilers and how that's going to link to everything. And again, goosebumps all over thinking about this. But man, that's really, really good stuff. And I know, Bradley, you continue to get on my nerve because you like the zombie movie so much. And yes, it does have just that much relevance. As I get it. At least we haven't had to go to 2001 Space Odyssey yet. We'll get there at some point in time. Oh, I know. I love it too. I mean, I love the movie, just not as much as Bradley.
Favorite real film of all time. Not I say real film. I said more non-horror film. How about that?